Don't have the microphone on. Now I do. What is happening out there, rotoscouts football fans? At least I realized it quickly this time. Good to see everybody. Little Thursday football action. My name's Terry. Welcome to the show. Pretty sure everybody knows that. Rotoscouts.com, NFL DFS. We're going to run down one game, little showdown slate. Solid NFC East game, though, between the two good teams in that division. Philly and Washington, 49.5 point total. Not too bad. What's going on, Andy? Andy made it. Afternoon. May we all cash. I agree. Let's get some cashes. Let's get some W's. Anybody do anything in basketball last night? Basketball was mayhem yesterday. 500-point FanDuel day. We don't see many of those. I forget whether there's been one. I'm pretty sure there has. Yesterday I said I don't think there has, and then in thinking back, I think I remember a couple over the last 2 years. Well, there's definitely not been many of those. Just one basketball game tonight. Projections are up on the site for the basketball game. They're up on the site for the 10-game hockey slate. And they're up on the site for this football slate. So we'll dive on in as people trickle in over the next little bit. So like I said, solid 49.5 point total for one thing. Two fairly high scoring teams. Only one defense that's, any really good at all. And that's the Philly side. And I think Washington, more than talented enough to overcome that, at least for DFS purposes, as far as keeping up, as far as pushing the score and making Philly have to do their work. Against Washington's defense, honestly, Philly should be able to do whatever they want, and they're always going to be one of our more highly projected DFS teams. Talk about it basically week in, week out, when they're one of the leading teams on just the scoring average because of Saquon, Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. Yet in Dallas Goedert there, it is a list of just guys who put up fantasy scores. So it's a really nice team to have against a terrible defense. There's a lot of different ways to build with the different skill players. You've got excellent quarterbacks on both sides. A lot of potential for just, some PPR-based scoring for some of the downboard receivers. You've got a free square kicker on FanDuel. Zane Gonzalez, the kicker for Washington today. He's cheap on DraftKings, but he's $4,800 compared to the $52 they're asking for Jake Elliott. On FanDuel, Jake Elliott's $9,000. And you'll usually get your kickers between, the 8 to 9 range, the 75 to 9 range. Getting Gonzalez for $5,000 is cheap. So that's a free square, especially if you like going to the kickers. I expect he's going to be really popular because of that. Stephen Leibowitz is here. What's going on, buddy? Greetings, mammals. Stephen, not assuming all human viewers. Very open-minded of you. Our porpoise community out there in the sea thanks you. Mama's another top 20 finish, still not getting first place, but whatever, can't complain. Data perfect construction trash. That was for NBA last night. If you hit the top of the board in NBA last night, you did not do poorly. That was a ridiculous scoring night. Biggest letdown for me was Claxton. I ended up getting a lot of Claxton late when whoever it was, Simmons and whoever sat for the Nets, just adjusted him up by like a point or so or a minute, and just it totally burnt me. He put up like 11 fantasy points. It was terrible on him. Jim saying, hi, I got 700 left on the table. Thoughts? My thoughts would depend on what's in that lineup, but no issues whatsoever with leaving money on the table. It's one of the quickest and most efficient ways to differentiate lineups for Showdown. So absolutely, I have no problem with that. But, the quality of the lineup is kind of dictated by what else is in it. Let's open this up a little bit. Does that look better? Yeah, there you go. I can actually read that now. Just waiting on some people to trickle in, but we'll get started in just a sec. Excuse my sniffling. Sudden allergy attack here as I start the show. Not exactly ideal. Mama says, yeah, I gave one pick to the chat yesterday after talking to my man Levine. Lock at 30 points. Yeah, I forget what Levine's game finished at, but he's playing well. Wemby turned into a monster. Yeah, dude. I mean, we talked about it yesterday. We'll continue to talk about it. On a per-minute basis, in his rookie year, the worst we'll ever see him, he was already putting up numbers that were comparable with Giannis at the top of the board. I mean, his limitless ceiling on any given night. And you saw what Giannis can do yesterday, obviously. So, ridiculous. But that's why we always go back to those star plays. You know, even though Giannis let us down the day before, obviously you needed him yesterday. Anyway, speaking of star plays. So, yeah, 49.5 point total, just a 4-point spread. Not that, not a gigantic gulf between these two teams. The Eagles giving up just 17.9 points per game and 1.8 touchdowns. Those rank 4th and 5th overall. Like I said, this is the good defense to deal with. So you've got to have a little bit of faith in Jaden Daniels' ability to lead this team. They are getting Brian Robinson in the backfield again. Austin Eckler probably relegated back to backup duties. Reading a text that's coming in. But the Eagles, in terms of limiting the points, they're also doing decent as far as limiting rush yardage. 4.5 yards per rush attempt allowed, ranks in the middle of the league. But 6.1 yards per pass attempt allowed, with a reasonably decent sack rate. 8.06% sack rate, ranks 12th. Couple of interceptions, middle of the board as far as interceptions go. But they were in first in football as far as yardage allowed per pass attempt. Potentially a limiting factor for the Commanders, for Jaden Daniels, as far as racking up a ton of pass yards, racking up a ton of scoring through the passing game. But what they've been is hyper efficient as far as that passing game goes. He's completing 69% of his pass attempts, throwing 26 times a game. That's the same amount that Jalen's throwing the ball on the other side. But that's 9 or 10 attempts shy of like an ideal volume for quarterbacks. Both guys run the football a decent amount of the time, though. 8.5 attempts per game for Jaden Daniels, 10.3 attempts per game for Jalen Hurts. Obviously, there's scoring there for both guys. Jalen more than double the touchdowns that Jaden's put up so far, but both guys are putting the ball in the end zone on the ground. So just some of those pass attempts go right here to those players and give them more individual upside where they don't necessarily always do all their scoring in correlation with a pass catcher. Especially on the Eagles, you get a lot of potential touchdowns going right to those two players specifically, not necessarily directly correlated with one another, but most definitely indirectly correlated with one another in that Barkley and Hurts actually both benefit from just the Eagles marching the ball down the field and putting it in scoring range. So there is the indirect correlation there. Then you get the direct correlation with the two amazing receivers and Dallas Goedert, but they're cut into a little bit, despite all being excellent, they're cut into a little bit by the number of times that these two are going to put the ball in the end zone on the ground. So there is a little bit of back and forth, and that's what, to me, makes both of these quarterbacks super viable, and the Jaden Daniels side definitely still viable, despite the fact that the Eagles have been locking down a little bit in terms of yards allowed per pass attempt, because I think he's still going to he's going to complete his passes. He's at an 8.2 yards per pass attempt on 7.5, let's call it, intended air yards per attempt. But they could cut that short a little bit, play a little bit more conservative of a passing game, rely on his ability to run with the football, pick apart the defense at a pretty decent completion rate, and maybe they don't take the big chances that we've seen them take in a decent number of games. He's got those weapons at his disposal, though. Terry McLaurin, 14.6 yard average depth of target, 43% of the team's air yards on 6.5 targets a game. He's got 6 receiving touchdowns on the season. McLaurin's an excellent downfield weapon. Noah Brown, not a bad option as far as a deep threat, 12-yard average depth of target. Only 1 touchdown on the board for the season, and this is where they start falling short a little bit in terms of comparable scoring if you look across lineups. There are fewer touchdowns here than there are across all those players, but it does peak higher just with McLaurin's dominance in that passing game right now. Last time out, McLaurin had 113 yards on five catches, targeted 6 times. That was over 30 routes run, but that's the nature of the efficiency of this attack. He had 125 yards on 5 catches back in week 8, 112 on 4 back in week 5, and 100 yards on 4 catches back in week 3. So that's what the nature of those big targets, those big attempts gets you. And it also buys you big play upside as far as our DFS is concerned, because you get that additional yardage tacked onto some of his potential scoring plays. So he's an excellent option. Noah Brown is more limited in terms of the output. Hasn't been over 75 yards all season, just has the 1 touchdown, but is the second most frequently targeted player as far as the receiver position goes. Zach Ertz outdrawing him a little bit, 5.4 targets a game to Noah Brown's 4.8. Ertz is a good downfield tight end, 7.7 yard average depth of target, operates a little closer, obviously, than the two big target receivers. He's only got 1 touchdown on the season so far, but he is a frequently targeted option in the red zone. He's got 1 target on the season. He wasn't targeted in the red zone over the first 4 weeks, which was a little bit weird. And then it kind of came to life. 4 targets in the red zone in week 5, 1 in week 6, 2, and then 1 in 2 of the last 3 games. In week 9 against the Giants, he played 28 snaps, just had 1 catch on 1 target. So that just the opportunity didn't come around. But he's been more frequently targeted. Those touchdowns will come as long as that targeting continues. And if we're expecting a competitive game, then presumably there should be some opportunities there. You also have the revenge narrative if you're looking for chasing that. Unfortunately, he doesn't call his own number. He doesn't throw the ball to himself. It isn't really a thing in football. Not nearly as much as it could be in basketball. Lone Wolf likes Noah Brown in captain. We'll build some lineups later. We'll take a look at some Ace Mind Sims. Jim's got, here's the rest of that lineup that Jim had. All right, so Hurts, Eagles, A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, Saquon Barkley, and McCaffrey with 700 left. You could definitely upgrade that McCaffrey spot. I'm not sure directly to who, but presumably there's somebody there that you could upgrade that to. Just eyeballing it. Is there enough to get to? No, it's a pretty big price gap, actually. Well, since we're talking about this receiving core, I might as well go into it, right? These 3 guys, fairly similarly projected. There's a little bit of a downscale here. And it's just kind of based on the targeting. They each got 3 targets the last time out. On the season, Olamide's gotten 3.2 to the 1.5 or so that the other 2 are getting. You're getting a catch to 2 catches tops out of each of these guys. You're getting just medium average depth of target out of each of these guys. They don't get a ton of the team's air yards. They're all more up-close operators that are going to rely on getting that red zone target. And you're talking about now, I just went through, Zach Ertz has only been targeted. I mean, he's been targeted in the red zone lately, but it isn't a gigantic number. And there are a number of weeks where he's gone untargeted in the red zone, and he's only got 1 touchdown. That's because a ton of touchdowns go here to Terry McLaurin. A bunch go to them just on the ground. Daniels has 4 rushing touchdowns. Brian Robinson's got 6, and Austin Eckler has 4. So this team runs the ball in at a significant clip. So once you're talking about these guys who are not big play threats and big scoring threats, now you're talking about, all right, now we need them to get up close, and I need that target to not go to Zach Ertz. I need that target not to go to Terry McLaurin, maybe Noah Brown. He's a little bit less of a threat for that. And I also need them to not run the ball in with one of those 3 pretty strong options on the ground. So you really winnow that down to, lower probabilities. But any one of those guys absolutely can get that target. And once we start talking about a showdown format, those are the kind of plays you do want to work in. So out of the 3, I don't really have a lean between Luke McCaffrey, Diami Brown, who are the guys who are basically the same price. Like, you could go up in that lineup that you're talking about from McCaffrey to Diami Brown. But I don't know that you're necessarily gaining any ground there. They're projected very, very similarly. They're getting basically the same targeting. They're providing basically the same output. I do think that Zacchaeus as long as the targeting holds up, is slightly better. But you can't jump from there to there as far as that money you've got left over. I don't think McNichols sees enough touches. He's got explosive upside, but I don't think he sees the touches. Does have 4 rushing touchdowns on the season, though, to hammer that point home about that, how much they run the ball into the end zone. He's carrying the ball 3.8 times a game. So there's just a ton of focus on the ground. Yeah, there's not a lot of ways to go from that 1,200. We'll pop that back into the lineup builder in a little bit, and we'll see what we could do. But yeah, Diami Brown would be the other guy, Jim, like you're saying in the chat there. Yeah, Mamba, I was watching that game, and I said very much that to my my buddy Charlie, who was here hanging out, and the way I put it was basically, that's the difference right now, at least, between this year's Knicks and last year's Knicks. That shot went down 100 out of 100 times for Jalen Brunson last year. And last night you saw, and it's been the case throughout the beginning part of the season. And that's, to me, I couldn't put it in good context yesterday during the basketball show, but I basically said, like, something is, hasn't quite been there for Jalen, but the numbers are not crazy bad. But the scoring was down a little bit for fantasy, and like that's a great example of what I was trying to put my thumb on, is just like he's getting a little bit of the downside of probability early. And yeah, that was obviously a heartbreaker to end the game. So on the grounds, presumably we're getting Robinson leading the way here. He was out the last 2 games. He also missed week 6. When he's out, Eckler does get the lion's share of the carries, but it's not crazy high volume. Robinson had gotten in week 7 and 8, carried the ball 12 times and 16 times. And then in weeks 9 and 10, the last 2 games with Robinson out, Eckler carried the ball 11 times and 13 times. He was targeted a few times in each game in the passing attack. He gets more targets on average than Robinson does, at least the second half of the beginning part of the season here. So there's a little bit of involvement for Eckler just, in the secondary role. But it's probably Robinson that we want. That's where most of the scoring upside goes. But I could definitely see a situation where, they've marched down the field. Robinson needs to be spelled. Eckler poaches a touchdown. Or Eckler gets in on a passing situation, third and goal from the 6. And Eckler poaches a touchdown. So a lot of different ways for Eckler to score. Don't think he's off the board at all. But you're talking probably more about like a 8-touch upside type day, 8 potential touch dart, where Brian Robinson more security to get like 15 potential touches. 15, maybe 18. I would consider 18 like the upside. He maxed out for the season so far at 24 potential touches, but basically every other week he's been more in like the mid to high teens. So I think, again, that's kind of what we're dealing with. But tremendous upside for scoring for either one of those running backs. And again, just on the total dart throw, maybe a couple carries go here and maybe he breaks another one. There is explosive upside in Jeremy McNichols for cheap. He's not actually cheap at $8,000 on FanDuel. He's the same price as Zach Ertz and more expensive than a lot of other players. Again, free square there with Zane Gonzalez. We talked about those guys down board. As far as everybody else, the Ben Sinnott, John Bates, second string tight ends of the world here, I don't think you go in that direction. They're just 1 point type of guys, and we're talking about under a target per game overall. In recent games, neither guy has run 10 routes in any single game this season. Put it that way. That's how big a dart throw those guys are. And just again, as we start whittling away probability of red zone targeting, this is not necessarily the team to go farming for those tight end plays that we do tend to like to get to. If you're playing a tight end from Washington, it's probably Zach Ertz. You do have a guy that's a little bit more realistic for that on the other side with Grant Calcaterra. He'll get involved. Most of his opportunity comes in games where Dallas Goedert's out. Last week, he ran 10 routes with Goddard back. Was targeted just once, but he at least got out there. He at least got a target. He's a capable receiver at the tight end position. In week 9, with Goddard out, he caught 5 of 5 targets for just 30 yards, but he was targeted significantly. He was the top tight end that week. 3 of 3 in week 8 against Cincinnati in the same situation. That was over 18 routes. The following week, he ran 33 routes in that Jacksonville game. So they gave him more to do that second time out. So there's definitely upside in that play. It's not extreme. It's a total dart throw on a showdown slate, but that's, the nature of showdown slates. There's tons of scoring quality across those 4 players, and it's like 4.5 if you want to include Dallas Goedert, who can definitely get involved. Goddard sees 5.3 targets a game. He was targeted 3 times last time out. He's got 1 touchdown on the board, more limited average depth of target, but that's still not terrible for a tight end. And he puts up a decent yards per target, 10.2 yards per target on a 6.9 yard ADOT. Not a bad option at the position. As far as his red zone targeting goes, 2 in the first 4 weeks of the season, 1 in week 2, 1 in week 4. And then they had a bye week, played 1 game, was untargeted, missed 3 games, came back last week, targeted twice in the red zone, caught 2 balls out of 3 targets overall, 25 yards, and scored his touchdown. So they're definitely going to look to continue to get him involved a little bit more than he's been since he's been out and since he was kind of underutilized for a couple weeks there in the middle of the season. I could see more red zone targeting going in Dallas Goedert's direction. 3 to 6 targets is probably the range that we're getting here. Devonta Smith was targeted just 3 times in their last game, but on the average, we're getting 6.3. He's catching 4+, 4.5 balls a game. So is A.J. Brown. Both guys operate down the field, but you get an additional chunk from A.J. Brown, and you get a little bit bigger of a scoring threat. On his 4.5 catches a game, he's putting up 92 yards, 13.5 yards per target overall, 32.46% of the team's air yards. He's got 3 touchdowns on the board. He missed weeks 2 through 4. He's still been over 100 yards 3 times. 2 of the 3 other games were 80-plus yard games, 89 and 84 yards on 5 catches in each game. Really just 1 lousy game all season was the Week 9 game. 2 catches, 36 yards, no touchdown. That week, Devonta Smith had 4 catches for 87 and a touchdown. Smith has caught a touchdown pass in 3 out of their last 5 games. Had a bad game against Dallas last week. 2 catches, 14 yards, no scoring. But definitely still a touchdown threat. Still a big play threat. Will be the lowest owned out of those top 4 Eagles. Maybe not on DraftKings with the way that salary works. I didn't look at specifically at the ownership numbers, but we'll mess around with it when we build lineups. But the public's going to go here outside of maybe a little bit of salary. He'll still be highly owned, but he's a very reasonable pivot from A.J. Brown. It's a very straightforward 1-1A type situation, 1-2, whatever you want to classify them as. But he's one of the top second option receivers. Saquon, just one of the best players in football, full stop, if not the best player. 6 rushing touchdowns on the season. He's got a pair of receiving touchdowns. He's targeted just 3 times a game. Catches most of what's thrown to him. 6.1 yards per target, mostly operating around the line of scrimmage. Little dump outs and screens. But tons and tons of scoring upside. Tons of bonus upside for Saquon as well. He's putting up 5.8 yards per rush attempt on 19 carries a game. The volume's ridiculous. One of the best volume options at the position, and it's a position that's dominated by volume. It's really what we're looking for, especially when you're getting that many yards per attempt. 110 yards a game, so we're averaging the bonus. Saquon is phenomenal, totally worthwhile MVP, totally worthwhile captain on site to site. Especially if the quarterbacks are getting a little bit more ownership, putting Saquon in that role instead, definitely a viable path to success. Love the upside for him. Lineups with him and Brian Robinson, honestly, and maybe leaning into a rushing attack and rushing touchdowns where people are thinking a little bit more pass probably with that high score and many viable receivers, I think is totally reasonable here as well. There's a lot of different paths to build with all these good skill players. Elliott's a good kicker priced correctly. You could definitely buy some upside for scoring there. And then again, Zane Gonzalez at 5,000 is just kind of a free square floating there on FanDuel. That's in your average game, that's a free 5 to 10 points. Free being a relative term, obviously. As far as downboard guys for the Eagles go, I mentioned Calcaterra. Johnny Wilson scored a touchdown last week. That was last week, right? Yeah, last week. 1 catch, 1 target, 5 yards, 1 touchdown. It was a hell of a performance. He played 18 snaps. He ran 5 routes. He had been a little bit more involved the week before. He played 32 snaps and ran 12 routes. But there is not a lot of volume here. The target last week was his first one since week 4. Prior to that, he had 1 catch for 9 yards on 6 targets over the first 4 weeks of the season. So if you're doing the math at home, that gives him 2 catches, 14 yards, and 1 touchdown on 7 targets. Not a lot. Aeneas Smith was targeted twice on 5 routes last week. He played 18 snaps, caught both balls for 6 yards, didn't score. Week before, he was targeted once. He caught it for no yards, it looks like, and then ran the ball once for 2 yards. Ran 1 route the week before in week 8. Very, very minor piece at 800. I don't think you're getting much upside there, but they did throw him the ball in each of the last 2 games. So maybe as a total wild random dart throw at 800 at 5,000 on FanDuel, again, you're just throwing up a dart at possibility. There's very, very little probability there. Probably a little bit more with Johnny Wilson, but not much. You just get the good feeling from the fact that he scored a low-owned touchdown last time out. Nothing predictive about that he's going to do it again. Jahan Dotson is demonstrably more involved, but he's really not all that good. He's been targeted just once in each of the last 2 games, but he did put up big plays on each target. 36 yards in week 9 against Jacksonville. He caught the 1-of-1. Caught 1-of-1 last week for 27 yards. Has not scored all season, but those were his 2 biggest plays of the entire season. Prior to that, he hadn't been over 11 yards. Hadn't been over 11 yards in a game, let alone on a play. And hadn't been over 2 catches. But had been more targeted earlier. Several games with 3 catches or 3 targets, a 4-target game in there. Has run consistent routes. He ran 20 routes each of the last 2 weeks. Had been more in the teens the 3 weeks before that. Prior to the bye week, the first 4 weeks of the season, he was running mid-30s routes every week. I'm sure they'd love to get him more involved. He was just doing nothing with the targeting that he was getting early in the season. So given the big plays that he's made over each of the last 2, I definitely think that Dotson, for a bigger investment, is more interesting than your downboard guys there. Will Shipley, I don't think is on the board. He did. People might spot 9 carries for 34 yards last week. That was all in garbage time. There is a tiny bit of upside for that. If Philly goes out and blows the doors off of Washington's bad defense, then maybe a guy like that goes out again and picks up. He did it in week 7 against the Giants. He had 8 carries, gained 15 yards. This past week against Dallas, 9 carries all in the fourth quarter for 34 yards. Hasn't scored, really not involved. But again, it's a total dart throw. I think there's probably more potential in Aeneas Smith at double the price as your total improbable dart throw. But you can see where those guys are projected. Those guys would not come up in my lineups if I ran it like this without saying, all right, let me make room for them. Typically, I set a 1-point threshold for showdown slates. That's about it up and down the player board here. Bunch of people here hanging out. Hit the like button if you get a chance. Pop on over to rotoscouts.com if you're unfamiliar. We've got these projections for football that you got. Also could just grab off the screen there, I guess, if you're feeling criminal about things. But then you would miss access to NBA projections for a, well, admittedly one-game NBA slate tonight. And nobody gives a shit about hockey, but there's a 10-game hockey slate up, and there's also projections for that up on the site today. Access to everything is under $1 a day, all in, all the sports. One price, access to every sport, no per sport pricing, no hidden fees, no nonsense, no buy it now, and then we change the price when it renews. Straightforward. Eventually we'll run a promo. Maybe that'll be... it'll be less, and then it'll renew at the full price. That's how those things work. But this is a all-the-time price, under $1 a day. We want to keep things super affordable so that people can use their bankroll the right way. Is there anything I missed in talking about players, game logs, anything interesting? What did Zacchaeus do last week? 1 catch on 3 targets over 11 routes, 8 yards. Had 2 catches for 48 yards on 8 routes run the week before. That's Zacchaeus. McCaffrey had the 1 catch for 23 yards on 3 targets over 18 routes. Diami had 2 catches for negative 13 yards. That's impressive. 7 routes run. That's, again, just breaking down that little ugly blob of receivers. Oops. That they've got just kind of competing for limited targeting. In the PPR scoring, they might get a little bit of an additional bump just on the idea of a couple of catches, even if they don't score. That's probably the site where they'll have more value. But all 3 of those guys are limited options at best. Very playable, but the probability of big scoring events with each of those guys is more limited than it is with the more obvious plays. What's up, Doug? Doug's feeling the Browns this week. I have not looked at much for the main slate yet. That's going to be tonight's project. I'll get back to you on that one tomorrow or Saturday. Probably Saturday. That's where we've been landing the main slate show. Mama's got 20 straight winners in case Dennis is in chat. Not giving out any more free winners until I'm on a show. Keep them coming, Mama. Andy's here. Jim Parrish is here. Lone Wolf is here. Good to see everybody. We have any, before we dive into lineups here, it's 6 o'clock. We're way early. And there is no NBA news. Only 1 game up on the NBA slate, but we do have, if you're playing that one, Luka's probable, Kyrie's questionable, PJ's doubtful, I believe. So just keeping an eye on those top-end Mavs, just to make sure nothing funky happens. 1 game basketball slates are, I don't know, not my favorite. I like, at least the football slates have a little bit more variability going on. Straight lining 1 game basketball slates is like, especially in like 1-star type games. So let's take a look. We'll throw some of these together. Any requests as far as building on DK? Where we'll start? Oh, I know one thing I need to do is, as usual, nope. Gotta angle my arm around the microphone there. Not easy to type. All right. So I like the idea of, like I was saying, locking down some of the rush scoring upside in this game. And there's a ton of different ways to do that through... The hell was that? Through these 4 players. Obviously, the 3 guys at the top of the list here are very easy to put into the captain role with their ridiculous touchdown scoring upside. I'm kind of interested in the Brian Robinson captain, though, because you get him a little bit cheaper. And you get very good touchdown upside with him as well. Now, can we get, what do we have? 75 per spot. We can get cheap around some of these guys, which is helpful. Having Wilson at 2K, Diami at 16, this group of players down here who, again, you know, as much as these guys aren't huge potential scorers, there realistically 2 or 3 targets for Diami Brown, for Luke McCaffrey, for OZ. There's maybe 1 for Johnny Wilson. I would consider Johnny Wilson below all 3 of those Washington receivers, just for the record. But since those guys are so cheap, I think we can continue to play up here for a sec. I love the upside for Terry McLaurin as far as his targeting, his big playability. It rivals the targeting and opportunity and big playability of A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, and he's not really sharing the touchdown, big play scoring upside as much as those two are with one another. He doesn't really share it on the same level with Noah Brown because Noah Brown's not nearly as good as Smith is. So that's one way to approach it, is if you wanted to just, you know, grab Daniels, grab McLaurin, and pad it out that way and then get cheap. But again, I kind of like the idea of sticking with some of the rushing touchdown upside and going to the other side for some of it. And in a showdown slate, obviously, we're not concerned about the 2 running backs or the, you know, multiple rushing attack angles. What happens if we try and take both? 53, that's not bad at all. So, I mean, this throws a huge blanket over at least a couple potential touchdowns just in this game, with the cheapest starting point at the captain spot among those guys. And I didn't look at that board as I pulled it up before, but I would think the lowest owned out of those 4 guys in the captain role. Maybe not, but I'm going to guess that he is. So I think that's a really strong starting point. It's still going to be chalky. We're dealing with a 3-man lineup that has 477 duplicates as a starting point. But there's so many ways to go now, and honestly, that's a decent amount of money to spend with these prices. We could still get a Dallas Goedert and Noah Brown into this lineup with ease. It would be a little bit more painful to also put Austin Eckler in that lineup, but that would be another interesting approach as far as just trying to capture those rushing touchdowns. It's not the way I'm going to go in this one, anyway. But I think that would be an interesting wrinkle to throw in. You could go with, can we get both tight ends into this? 66 and 55, and then I got 39 left. So I could get down here. I just go like OZ. Leave 900 on the table. It's duped 4 times and change. That's not bad. If you went instead of Zacchaeus with Luke McCaffrey, who was in that lineup that was mentioned before, it's same idea. This is not bad. I do think, though, since we've got Jalen in there, it would make sense maybe instead of Ertz and another DC pass catcher to give Jalen somebody else to throw to in addition to Goddard there. We do have Saquon, though, who picks up a lot of targeting. So there is actually that correlation there. Yeah, it probably is better the first way I went with using one of those guys. And that keeps the ownership super low anyway. If you went with Johnny Wilson and his low volume, you're fine on price, and you're only due once. That's interesting. It 100% relies on Johnny Wilson there to get one target and catch it in the end zone again. I think that's a bigger dart throw than those DC guys, but that does cut your ownership down again. But it is a little bit more limiting on your overall projection there. You could go, again, even thinner with Smith, who was targeted twice last week, not in a significant scoring way. But you could get Smith there, and now I get 3,100 back. So I could kick Zach Ertz up to... Does that work? I didn't do the math. It does. What about that? It's kind of an Eagles wipeout, and then just Brian Robinson up at the top. That isn't duped all that much, and you're getting Saquon, Goddard, Smith, and Hurts, and then everything relies on the other Smith actually catching a touchdown pass again. Super, super limited. But there's approaches down there, and this guy was targeted twice last week. He's carried the ball. He's touched the ball a couple times in each of their last couple games. Again, Showdown Slate. Talking about possibility, not probability. Probability is important still. Don't get me wrong. But those are the ways to thin out your lineup as much as possible. There's a lot more safety. There's a lot more opportunity to cash lineups. So it depends on what your goal is. If you're just putting more guys from up here and into the mid-range and not building it out and trying to, cut down dupes, then if you do happen to win, you're going to be cutting your prize pool up 50 different ways, which is not a bad thing sometimes. I mean, again, it depends on what you're looking for. If you put one lineup in for $9 or $15 or whatever the entry fee is on your site, and you come away with $12,000, I assure you, you're going to feel good at the end of the night. So it's just all about what your goals are when you're building these lineups. But for tournament strategy, for large field tournament strategy, for ongoing, large field success, these are the approaches that you tend to take, because when those plays do hit, they hit in such a big way, such a differentiated way, that it pays for those times, in theory, that you've missed out. And then it all just depends on, heavy air quotes, luck, where you fall along the timeline of probability. Yeah, Anthony points out, now watch it be a defense game. Yeah, I mean, look, we've seen it 1,000 times with these stupid-ass Thursday games. It could easily just tank both of these good offenses. It's conservative, they're on short rest, blah, 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 blah. We've seen it. So, yeah, it's not entirely sure that it's going to be a crazy blowout game. To me, a little bit more of a compelling reason to also consider some of the rushing attack. But odds are, and Vegas heavily favors, and all projections and everything points to, this should be a good scoring game. Should be. Mom is saying, chiming in, yeah, not a defense game unless you count Barkley defending Washington from winning. I like it. Pat wants to see a Daniels captain double stack. Oops. It would help to copy paste the right name to start with. So let me just go the straightforward way and we'll get Terry McLaurin in there, and I'll go Ertz over Noah Brown for a little bit of savings, and because there's half a target additionally there, and there's similar scoring upside. And then we get 66, which isn't bad. You could give him another receiver from that down lineup group, but I'd rather spend money a little bit up this way first. What you could do is the kicker to go along with that group, though. And then 75, so I can work in this range. Or I can go one of those two, which is probably the better approach. Saquon's a little bit cheaper. 44, I could take, in a really weird approach, you could throw the Eagles defense into that for exactly 44. Probably makes more sense to consider like a Dotson, a Commanders defense, something like that. I don't love the Commanders defense here, though, so I don't think I'd go that route. It probably actually would be best to just say all the Eagles juice goes to Saquon and maybe get one of these guys and leave some salary, in which case probably OZ with, potentially a little bit more targeting. That's duped 12 times, though. I don't love that. I mean, if you go one of those guys, it's going to cut it down, but still be duped a handful of times. And there's, again, you're getting limited that way. So instead of Saquon, maybe we go a different direction with 75 again to spend. Instead of doing that, if we go to Devonta and then 64, I can't get Goddard. Damn. I can if I don't use the kicker, though. That leaves me 46. And again, you're still right back in this range. I don't think the Eagles' defense is unplayable against that stack, but it is a multi-way scoring stack because you're looking for touchdowns from those guys and probably for him to run one in. If you go just big maybe instead with a little bit less than Saquon, go to AJ, and then I can get back to the kicker, who is right there. And then I'm at 5. I'm still short of the other kicker. Put myself in a little box here where I can't get out of this ownership trap. And everybody else effective up this way is a commander. I guess you go here. Obviously, there's ways to finish this lineup off, but as I'm getting there, it's not going to result in anything that I really wanted to get to. So let's see. All right, so got it. That leaves me 66. You could pad that up with Noah Brown. We've got Ertz in there already. You can go kicker to finish it off. Leave some money on the table. That's not terrible. Dual tight end. Commander stacked behind a Jaden Daniels captain. Kicker is a really unique approach. Let's put it that way. I don't love this lineup, but it does get down to fairly low dupes with realistic scoring potential in a Jaden Daniels captaincy, which is really all we can ask for. If you're putting one of these guys in, I think each of these receivers, outside of a little bit of touchdown equity, has lower probable scoring than both kickers. So you can obviously work one of those guys in. Right? If you take Zacchaeus and throw him in instead of their kicker, it's around similar duplication and you pick up some touchdown upside, but then you're also limiting the number of touchdowns that are going to these guys where you're already deep in that lineup, where you do potentially gain a little bit of correlation where on the drives where they don't convert the touchdown, but they've gotten close enough, maybe Gonzalez comes through and you pick up a little value there. So I don't know that it pays to thin that out any further. You could obviously do the same thing by putting another one of these guys in, a Johnny Wilson. I don't think you go to Smith in this situation. A Dotson at 4,000. But then you're taking 2 Eagles pass catchers and not the quarterback. It's not an ideal setup. Kenny Gainwell doesn't really give you much value. He's there. He exists. Last time out, Gainwell, 7 carries, 30 yards. Caught 1 pass on 1 target. He has been targeted exactly 1 time in each of their last 6 games. He's caught 3 of those. He's got no touchdowns on the season. He peaked at 13 carries in week 7. That was for 56 yards. Every other week he's been below 30 yards. He is a viable player just on the idea that he's going to touch the football. Right? So if you wanted to go there, and actually I would probably do it that way. That's all right, but again, we're not really covering our downside with that Gainwell play. I don't love that setup, but it's another just cheap kind of approach to get that Jaden Daniels dupes down as far as possible. If you did go Dotson, it would be the same thing. This is super low owned. You have some just pass catching upside. Not that Dotson's been good at catching passes or frequently targeted, but there's a little bit of pass catching upside, uncorrelated. And then if they consistently fail on drives and Elliott's picking up kicks, there's a little bit of tie-in between those three. But that's not my favorite build. Let's get out of this lineup. Do another one here. I've got the Ace Mine Sims run in the background too, so we'll pull those up and we'll look at the some of the results, some of the percentages, and just how the lineup construction came together. To go the other way, we can go with Hurts at the top. This will just be feeding us into the exact same situation, but it'll be fun. Here I could go with Devonta, where with the Jaden one, you really do want to get this direct Jaden McLaurin correlation if you're going to the passing game from the Washington side, where it's perfectly reasonable to take Smith over AJ Brown and save a little bit of money from if you're going to Hurts in the captain spot. And then getting back to like Goddard, this is a situation where maybe some Eagles defense could get in play. If they're bottling up the pass a little bit, then it's just a matter of maybe a rushing touchdown or so. That's where your upside for the under and the disappointing Thursday night game comes from. Is just the Eagles potentially bottling up the pass a little bit here. And largely that just basically comes down to stopping Terry McLaurin. So I don't mind getting the Eagles if we're going with a Hurts-Smith upside. And then we've got 68. So you can work in Goddard for a little correlation at 66 is easily enough. You could also spend back up. You could get AJ in here if you want him. That's honestly fine. 5,200, we've got the world to buy down here. You could go Eagles wipeout and just go like bang like that and the other kicker. And you're already under 10 dupes, leaving 500 on the table. This would be a complete destruction of the Commanders by the Eagles. But the idea that I can get a Hurts stack with AJ and Smith in it and get it under 10 dupes that easily, that's actually kind of compelling. I don't dislike this setup. Again, you are chasing a less than likely outcome in terms of how that game total is aligned and what Washington's scoring has been like basically all season. But you're taking a guy who in an unlikely low-scoring game from them could do the lion's share of their scoring. You're taking the two most likely correlated scorers with that quarterback. And then you would have this great-looking lineup, and you'd be confident, and you'd check, and you'd be like, oh, man, this is only due 2 times. This is great. I'm going to win myself $50,000 tonight. And then it would be a day where just, Saquon 3 touchdowns, and he's not in your lineup. Jaden Daniels runs 2 in, ruins your Eagles defense. But I do think that's kind of playable as far as that expensive top end with Hurts captain and the top 2 receivers. I'm actually surprised that was that easy to build and that it came up under 10 dupes. And let's go with just so I like the skill players in these roles. Did I do a McLaurin already? I don't think I did. In this, I want both of these guys. And then you can take Goddard easily enough here. 42. I don't like this move, but I think that makes sense. Ooh, it does tie up, though. Unless you go to the Eagles defense. I was thinking Zane was 45, not 48. All right, let's get that out of there. These guys down, again, I'm just kind of using Zacchaeus, Diami Brown, Luke McCaffrey interchangeably. Oh, you know what? I haven't thrown Calcaterra into one of these yet, though. I don't love going with the 2 tight end approach. If my unlikely tight end, where they haven't been targeting the tight end all that much, I don't know that I get both of them. But that would be a unique approach to building. You're already down to 25 dupes with the last man to go in and 7,500 to spend. So you could go back up the board and get like Noah Brown to go with your Jaden Daniels. He's right there. And this will still be fairly, 8. I mean, it's not ideal, but that's anything under 10. Totally reasonable, especially when you're starting with a pretty big top end. But again, the idea that both these guys come through is a little bit thin for me. Well, I shouldn't say it that way. It's a little bit thin to be on a show saying, go play this lineup. It's not really thin for me to play that lineup in 150. Two different things. Barkley has literally had a run over 20 yards in every game he has played against Washington. Look, there's only so much you want to do as far as like looking back over time, because at a point you're looking at how he does against Laundry, because there's different guys on these teams each year, especially in football, a high turnover sport like football. There's really limit the amount of credence you want to put into that. And that's why, especially when you get late in careers with, 15 years in quarterbacks, like, Matt Stafford's playing in a game and they're, he's got a career record of 16-9 against this team. He beats them pretty consistently. He's always thrown for you're talking about a defense that was completely different 12 years ago. It doesn't really matter. Saquon's got a lot of experience in direct games against Washington because he's been in the NFC East his entire career for sure. But we're getting up there to the point where it's like, some of those defenders are not the same guys. You're just talking about the same uniforms. Depending on how far back you go with the Commanders, you might not even be talking about the same uniforms, logo, or your team name. Do we want to see anything else here? Did I finish? I haven't finished this one. Nice, luxurious stroll through this slate. Coming up on an hour. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe if you haven't already. rotoscouts.com is the site. Our sim partners over at acemine.io are going to be the backbone of what I show you next with some of the lineups that were built in the sim that ran. We'll also take a look at some percentages. Promo code rotoscouts, all in caps, gets you 20% off your first month with those guys. All right, so let's look to finish this last lineup here. What if I did this? That's too expensive. I really like the idea, again, just going back to that original theme of 3-player in any given lineup rushing touchdown upside in this game. And again, that's not to say there's not a ton of passing touchdown upside in this game. There is. But if people are leaning more that way, give me some of the ridiculous rushing touchdown upside in this one. So I like having that little group of players. Same thing, swap Saquon in for any one of those guys. You could, again, dance with Austin Eckler in that sense, just on a lower potential touch basis. So we're at 34 here, so now we're back down to this group of guys down here. If we want to get cheap, we could go like Diami Brown and then bounce back up a little bit and grab like Jake Elliott to finish that off, and we're at just under 4 dupes. And honestly, that's nothing wrong with that. You get your Daniels correlation with multiple players. Hurts, honestly, as a quarterback goes, probably the best standalone quarterback that there is, just on that ridiculous rush touchdown upside that he's got. So perfectly fine with an uncorrelated Hurts share there. And then you get Jake Elliott, who does a little bit of correlated work with Hurts for sure as his quarterback, setting him up for that big leg to kick some field goals. I don't mind this one. That's probably one of the honestly more interesting builds that you got to. You're thin on targets here, but again, you're just mixing and matching your way through multiple thin target options down that way. In any given week, it's going to be one of those guys. Mamba wants to see Goddard. All right, this will be the last one for DraftKings. I'll throw like one FanDuel one in there just for the laugh. But as usual, FanDuel is just kind of boring to do this exercise with because the lack of multiplier just makes it so straightforward. More interesting for basketball on FanDuel, honestly, with the 3 multiplier spots. I don't know why they don't do similar for football. So, Goddard, I'm going to go directly back to getting a little bit of tie in there. I'm going to go this way. And then I would consider the Eagles defense in that one again. Not really worried about this because there's obviously just, volume in between the 20s there for him. So even if they keep him out of the end zone or even if they give up one rushing touchdown, they could still handle their business. And that puts me at 82. I mean, it's super easy to just go with like a McLaurin. You could go any of these guys, really. There's a lot of money left in this one. Maybe I take the Eagles out of that. That cuts us down under 7. Goddard, Robinson. That leaves a lot of salary on the table with $5,300 left. But that cuts down, you're projected a few points behind some of those other ones as well. But again, going both kickers, Ertz, realistic touchdown upside, Robinson, realistic touchdown upside, especially if we're leaving out Jaden Daniels. Those are, that's a somewhat direct way to get to those touchdowns, if they happen, obviously. Where, like, if you did that with McLaurin, there's more probability that Jaden Daniels is racking up bigger yardage totals, completing more passes, and creating more potential big scoring events in tandem with Terry McLaurin than there is necessarily with Zach Ertz. And then Brian Robinson obviously has his touchdown equity on the ground mostly. A little bit of involvement in the passing game for sure, but mostly rushing touchdown upside there. So I think that's a reasonable way to build a lineup that's leaving Daniels to the side. There's more than enough money available if you wanted to put him in and make some changes there. But it's not completely terrible. Again, it sacrifices a couple fantasy points as compared to where we were, and there's probably better lineups out there than this. But it is very infrequently duplicated, and it's using reasonable players. Everybody in this lineup is going to be involved in this football game. So it's not completely terrible. Yeah, Eckler's there too, Brett. We'll go... You could go that approach and double up the rushing touchdown upside that you're taking from these two guys, which honestly is not a bad approach, again, in a lineup where you're choosing to leave out Jaden Daniels. Just feed it all into the running back position. And there is, like I was saying in the positional breakdown, there is a little bit of potential, certainly, even if he only sees fewer than 10 touches. Those could be key touches where Austin Eckler poaches a touchdown. Honestly, he's got the potential to poach multiple touchdowns. So not a crazy way to build a non-Daniels lineup. And then, yeah, you got 6,400 left here. So you could go back to the kicker-kicker combo if you wanted. Just to see where that lands by comparison to that other one. Yeah, this is a sub-1 dupe. Nothing wrong with that build. Direct potential here. I think you are chasing an under and a low-scoring game with this lineup and that previous one. It's kind of a specific narrative lineup, but this is not a bad lineup for that narrative, for that result. You got more money to spend too. If you want to upgrade and not play the kicker, obviously there's ways to go there. I would leave probably Elliott in with that Eagles upside, and then I've got 77 to spend if I do that. So, yeah, you're living up in this territory. Get Noah Brown in there for a little additional commander scoring potential. You go Dotson, pad out the Eagles side of things with Hurts. You could go a different way and probably still use Smith here. Yeah, he's 4,300 to take here. So I don't love the idea of going to Dotson here, but just to prove the point, Look how far below 1 that is. It's probably not actually 100% correct. I would expect that this has more than 1 dupe, but it would be very low dupes. Let's put it that way. Because remember, we've got Dallas Goedert in the captain spot there. So it's not a terrible approach. And then you can obviously, again, use any of these guys, and that's going to continue to cut that number down and save you money. A lot of low dupe lineups with that specific construction. It's not an uninteresting way to build. If you put any one of these 4 guys into that spot as the captain spot, they would be more owned, more duped, and less potentially profitable. This was a good call. Whoever said to build that, was that Mamba? That was a good call, Mamba. I like it. I'm going to throw 1 into this FanDuel one, and I'm going to pull up some Ace Mine real quick. It's almost definitely going to be the right approach to go there. How expensive does this exercise get? I thought it was going to be critical to have Zane Gonzalez to put those 3 guys in the same lineup, but it turns out it's not. You can do that and then still go like Austin Eckler, Dallas Goedert, Noah Brown, Jake Elliott, either of the defenses, Zach Ertz for just 8,000. FanDuel's so dumb. That's duped 64 times, so that's going to be a little bit popular. That's mostly from these 3 guys. I was just curious. I didn't think it was going to be that easy. And again, I thought it was going to be Zane and then like Luke McCaffrey, Zane and like Johnny Wilson. You can get stupid with FanDuel. All right, so a more somewhat realistic one. I would continue to go like that, and we're already going to be crazy duped again. And then, I want to just keep going back to that because it's so cheap, but it doesn't do us any favors on ownership. 11 grand to spend. So stupid. See, this is where I'm inclined to just leave a ton of money on the table and take one of these guys just to artificially bring that ownership down. And you're still 17. If you double that spot up with 2 of those less than likely receivers, now we're at least cutting down those dupes, leaving a ton of money on the table, but we're at least below 10 dupes. We're at 5. And as unlikely as these guys are, it's not impossible that Daniels throws 1 to each of those guys. And that's how they get their scoring today. It's not likely. It's not what I'd call a good lineup. Taking a different direction real quick. I know I said I was just going to build 1, but capture the rush upside in a different way with those 3 players. And then you could easily stick Devonta Smith into that lineup. And we can't get Smith and McLaurin in there. Although, you quite easily could if you just did this. It's so dumb. It's duped 17 times, but that's a potential winning lineup, and then you're just chopping what's on top on FanDuel today? 25 or something like that? I think it's small today. Again, not ideal, but FanDuel, there's only so much we can do about these dupes sometimes. And everything down here thins out as far as those dupes go. It thins out your probability. But again, we are talking about Showdown. We're talking about possibility. We're talking about separation from the field and capturing those low probability but highly profitable scoring events. And that's the name of the game. Let's get some of those Ace Mine results up here for you. Come on. So again, our sim partners, if you haven't been here before, acemind.io. Ran these over there earlier in the evening. And we're seeing a lot of Jalen Hurts in the captain spot out of the gate. But this one, I mean, look down. There's a little curveball with an Eckler lineup creeping into the top 20 here. Eckler, Jalen Hurts, Saquon, A.J. Brown, Zane Gonzalez, and Grant Calcaterra in that one. That's a wild lineup to have succeeded that many times in 88,000 entries, 50,000 sims per iteration, and 5 iterations. It's a lot of sims. Overall, in our top 150, yeah, I'll pull it up, Mama, if I have one here. So Jalen landed in the captain role on DraftKings in our top 150 lineups. He's in the captain spot in 53% of them. That's how big his scoring potential is. He's got a dramatically high projection, but deservedly so, and honestly right around his scoring average in a game where they're playing a paper-thin defense. 37% of the time he's in the flex spot. So obviously, 9 out of 10 lineups, you should have Jalen Hurts in one of those two spots, and he is a fundamental piece of the captain role today. Going to be super popular in that spot, but these lineups did come through. These are the top-end lineups. Jaden Daniels is in most of these alongside Jalen Hurts. As we've talked about before, tons and tons of data to support the idea that one at worst, and a lot of the time, 2 quarterbacks on DraftKings and Showdown slates is somewhat mandatory for winning. Not necessarily always in this construction where one is in the captain spot just because of that salary multiplication. A lot of the time you see 2 of them in the flex roles. But today we're getting a lot of Jalen here, and we're getting a ton of Jaden Daniels in the flex spot, 74% of the time, flex. 9% in the captain role. So again, it's another player who's approaching 9 out of every 10 lineups. Not quite there, but that is a significant chunk. McLaurin crept into a few captain lineups, 3%. I think that makes some sense. 15% of them in the flex role. Dallas Goedert did get into 3 captain spots, Mamba, so we'll have one to look at for you. 3% captain, again, not nothing, and we built a lineup that I really liked with Dallas Goedert in the captain spot. So, rewind back a couple seconds, grab that one, throw it into DraftKings. Thank me later. I'm not remotely near that confident in that lineup or that cocky to say something like that for real. Hopefully you guys know me well enough to know that. Let's see. Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler got in a 13% of the captain spot. Holy shit. I'm going to say that is very, very price-driven in that he probably has the cheapest path to reasonable scoring potential and buys you several of the other upside players. Like this one that we looked at, granted, it's one of them's a kicker and then the other one's Grant Calcaterra, is also kind of a dart throw. Let's see if we got other ones. This Eckler, Jalen, Jaden, Smith, Brown, McCaffrey. So you're in most of these, you are still taking a second dart. In addition to the Eckler captain, as cheap as he is in that role, he's not crazy discounted. And it does still necessitate having a Zacchaeus, a McCaffrey, the kicker, Diami. A lot of those are like the same build, just rotating one of those different players into that last role too. A.J. Brown, 16% in the flex, just 2% in the captain. But that's a play that you can choose to make a little bit more than that. We got more Smith in the captain role, which I think makes sense given the price dip. And again, tons of 1-1A upside for Devonta Smith on any given slate. So I like seeing those shares in the captain spot, and then 37% of them in the flex role. Significant piece. Saquon, 7% captain. You can definitely take a bigger share than that. And if you're taking a, not leaning into the Jalen play, I think taking more Saquon at captain makes all the sense in the world if that's your approach. But the Sims are heavily, heavily favoring the Jalen upside at captain. Let's find that Goddard lineup. There it is. Goddard, Hurts, Jaden Daniels, Devonta Smith, Brian Robinson, and Luke McCaffrey. But again, that McCaffrey spot, pretty swappable. There's another one right here. This one uses Daniels, McLaurin, Eckler, and McCaffrey. Interesting. Should be another one. Eckler-McCaffrey combo again. This time it goes back to Devonta Smith. It's weird that McCaffrey keeps coming up with him. This is basically the same lineup, so you can get that with Smith, Eckler, and Diami Brown if you wanted it. But that seems to be the construction. What was the one that I built? I've already forgotten. Is it still in there? Let's see. Can I undo enough of these to get back to that lineup? You guys have the luxury of rewinding. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so we built one that was Goddard, Hurts, Robinson as the first three, and then like you had the room to go McLaurin, Devonta Smith. But it seems like the more profitable approach to those lineups would be with your Dallas Goedert captain to put both quarterbacks in, and that totally jives with what I was just saying before about having the value of both quarterbacks in the flex role. So Mama, specifically, since you asked about it, I think that I would strongly recommend doing that based on these results. And you can do that if you look at that lineup that's right there. Go to both quarterbacks. You can still get Smith and Robinson, and then you're just taking a slight step down in the Luke McCaffrey spot and not leaving as much money on the table. Those lineups that we built had Robinson, no Daniels, two big receivers, and then left a big chunk of money on the table. So different approaches. I'm sure that if you scroll down further, you would find different builds, but it does look like the most profitable way, and it makes total sense, is having both quarterbacks in with your Dallas Goedert shares. Mom is saying that Noah Brown dropped too many easy passes last week, so I'm going to swap Noah Brown usage with Luke McCaffrey. It's a way to go. I don't love the just diving in and speculating, but you obviously have seen very good results, my friend. So definitely, if that's your approach, people might do well to listen. Dennis is here. We can start the show. Finally, been waiting. 6:51 on your clock. This game starts at 8:15. The NBA doesn't start for 2 hours beyond that, right? That's a 9 o'clock game, right? Yeah, 9 o'clock game. I don't know what I'm going to do with my time. Let's see. No NBA news yet. I haven't seen any news about this game. Let's see. We'll jump over to Underdog NFL. Nothing. No news is good news. I'll pull up some FanDuel real quick here on Ace Mind. You're going to see a whole ton of Jalen Hurts. There he is. There's a Jaden Daniels poking his head through. You see a ton of Hurts and Jaden Daniels in basically all of these lineups because it's FanDuel. I don't know that in our top 150 we have anybody not named Hurts or Daniels in that captain role. It would be Saquon if we do. He's got to be in a few of them at least. Yeah, there's a couple. So we did get some Saquon creeping through. It's almost exclusively Hurts. There's a Terry McLaurin made it. So in the MVP role, it is primarily Jalen Hurts in like the vast majority of these lineups. That's easily, and since it's not split over here on the board, I'm going to speculate 70-ish% or more. Jaden Daniels is probably the next man up, but it's not all that many shares. Just look for the color. Look for the color change between those green and red ones. Not a lot. And then Saquon in there. Saquon and Jaden Daniels might be close to one another as far as these counts, but Jaden Daniels averaged higher end lineups in terms of the head-to-head there. All three of those players belong in a lot of these lineups. This one's got Daniels, Saquon, Hurts with Hurts and McCaffrey. Perfectly fine. But again, it's FanDuel, so you're going to have to expect to be duped numerous times unless you get really funky with some of the builds. And that's where you're taking possibility over probability sometimes ends up coming through a little bit. We're already doing that to a degree with the Zacchaeuses, the McCaffreys of the world. If you're playing Kenny Gainwell, you're doing that to a degree. So those are the lineups that we're getting up top here. We're also seeing a little bit of Commanders defense, which is going to be very much along those lines of just like, that's a total dart throw today, thinking that this Commanders defense is going to stand any chance of shutting down this Eagles offense. But maybe they create one scoring event where it does end up paying off. So that's how those lineups end up creeping through to the top end of the ROI spectrum in Sims. Seeing a fair amount of Zane Gonzalez in here. Again, the FanDuel price is stupid low. And we're getting two significant three-man front ends with Jalen, and Saquon. Noah Brown, not a bad option in that one. Same basic build there. Same basic build, except it goes AJ instead of Saquon in this one. But that is a super straightforward approach to unlocking a multiple superstar upside. This one, for example, with a Hurts MVP, you get AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. You get Jaden Daniels and whatever he does on his own uncorrelated, and then the Zane Gonzalez play. Did we build that one? I think we might have. So that just seems to be the approach. If you play Zane Gonzalez, it's specifically to have the ability to put three of the top projected overall players into your lineup. So again, it is FanDuel. It is super straightforward. Do your best to at least differentiate, one of those spots and utilize one of these lower probability, distinct possibility types. You want to stay within the realm of reality. Again, don't play guys who aren't going to dress or are going to dress but stand on the sidelines unless something happens. I don't believe in the, have a few lineups with backup quarterbacks play, for example. I know that's popular among people. I don't think that's the correct approach. I think there's enough room in the low end, the low owned spectrum around the 1Z, 2Z, 3Z target guys that you can create that upside without going to the pure backups, the guys who need an event above them on the depth chart to create their opportunity. Thank you, Jim. Good luck to you too, pal. Captain Butterfingers Noah Brown for Dennis. Jake likes the Connor McDavid 10 points and a Jahan Dotson touchdown parlay. If you're going cross-sport parlays. That'd pay. I don't think you can make a 10-plus point bet. I would imagine that's off the board for NHL player prop. But you could probably get a 5-plus? Is that on the board? I don't know that I've ever bet an NHL player prop. But McDavid would be a right guy to choose that with. The Dotson touchdown, again, the targeting is crazy thin. But the fact that he made his two biggest plays of the season on his single catch in each of their last two games is at least sort of encouraging. It was a 20-yard catch and a 30-yard catch over the last 2 weeks. So there's a little something there. And the potential for that to increase with the, increased productivity. But they also do have Dallas Goedert back in the fold. They've got the top two options soaking up a ton of that volume. They throw to Saquon a fair amount. Saquon demands a ton of touches in the ground game. And then you get the upside for touchdowns going just directly to Jalen Hurts in the rushing game. So there's a lot of things working against that John Dotson touchdown, but that's why he's such a good price. Mamba likes the Luke McCaffrey 3 catches plus 500 more realistic. Yeah, that's pretty good bet, actually. I like that plus 500. 3's not out of the realm of probability for him. He has 3 3-catch games on the season, but has not had one since week 5. Hasn't had more than 1 catch since week 5. And I'll go you one better. He's only actually, I'm going to unwind saying that that's a good price. It might not be, unless you're just riding on that potential for more volume. Since that week 5 game in which he caught 3 of 3, the only time he was targeted 3 times was in this most recent game where he caught 1 ball for 23 yards. After week 5, it was 1 target in week 6, none in week 7, 2 in week 8, none against the Giants in week 9, and then just the 3 in their most recent. Running mid-teens routes across most of those games. Did run 18 this past week, but ran 19 in week 8, was targeted twice, caught 1 of them. So you do need that target uptick that you're predicting there for that to come through. But again, that's why you're getting the good price on it, right? That's why you make the bet. Jake likes all those bets as standalones and then throw them all together. Listen, this is not a betting show. This is a DFS show. I'm not a betting guy. I don't make many sports bets. I've told you guys that before. I'm very much more a fantasy player, a poker player going back over time. That's a specific convergence of skill sets. But as far as betting, I'm outside of having the projections and everything to work with and being able to functionally like model these things and talk about them, I don't make many sports bets. So jump over and ask our pals over at what you call it? The hell are they? Odd Shopper. Forgot the name. They've got a new thing going over there, right? Not to plug them. They don't need me plugging them. But I saw that one of the guys was tweeting about you can like directly tail their bets for money now. Seems like a cool idea. Yeah, Mamba, for sure. And that's where, to me, looking into player props is very advantageous. And it's great for helping figure out minutes. If there's a question in NBA for like a rotation, I'll immediately jump to like, all right, what do these props look like? And it can kind of give you the range because you know what their rates are, you know what their scoring and so on rates are. So yeah, they can be very, very directionally informative. Again, you're going with just people that are sharper than we are, putting those numbers together, and that's them and doing their modeling and speculation. But my dad's famous line, they don't build all those casinos by being wrong. So OMG Lowell's knows the glory days of full tilt poker. Best GPPs ever. Whew, man, were they. It's so weird. I literally never play anymore online. Like, it came back in Jersey, like at this point, like 10 years ago. And I just haven't been playing. It's a small player pool, but since the last time I checked, it's probably grown. I don't know if they've made more deals with different states or whatever. But it had been dramatically shrunk. But yeah, but before the Black Friday, Black Monday, whatever day of the week it was, when the government stepped in, shut the sites down, and seized everybody's accounts. Before that, oh my God, those were the salad days. It was the best. 20,000 person entry, massive field tournaments with giant prize pools and decent downboard payouts. All you needed was the 6 hours of time to sit there at your computer and grind it out. You could cash those things on the regular. Satellites going off every 2 seconds. Multi-tabling 16 satellites. That's where it got into crackhead territory. We had 16 different little windows going. I never went multiple monitor. I think the most I ever did was 16. And it got really, really rough. Didn't do that many times. Pacific. I was big on party poker at the beginning. And then full tilt for a long, long time. I was on Stars, but I didn't play as much on Stars. Stars is like Roto Grinders for me. It's there. It's like it was like the monolith for a while. But I was more a full tilt guy. Or maybe that's more of like a DraftKings FanDuel, like full tilt versus Poker Stars. I didn't even realize it's been a couple of years. We're just talking about it again the other day with my buddy Charlie. Was the World Series isn't even on ESPN anymore. I didn't even know that. Got picked up by CBS, which is crazy because the World Series of Poker was on ESPN going back to like the 70s. That had been a long, long relationship. Yeah, Full Tilt was really good for a while there. And then I think shady things went on with some of the pros who were investors and owners in the background taking some money and so on and so forth. But yeah, way back in the day, I had a little poker message board site. It's not up anymore. It was called badbeatboards.com. I actually interviewed Phil, one of the Phils for it. Forget what his name was. Gordon? Phil Gordon? Is that a player? I think that was it. One of the Phils. Anyway. God, has it been 20 years? That's wild. So there's like people out there that don't even know the paradise of the poker boom. I was playing before that, and that was just like, that was a decade that was just in my wheelhouse for stuff like that. I've told you guys about, hosting the ongoing weekly poker game that we had for 15 years. Every single Wednesday, basically, at my house. It was wild. They still have all the chairs right over there. There's like 30 metal folding chairs in a room that is not large enough to have 30 metal folding chairs just sitting in the corner for years. God, 2006? That's bananas. Let's open it up again. Legalize it. People would jump back on, I think. It's nowhere near as popular as it was at like the peak of the poker boom. But I think, the entire community that I'm talking to would jump on in a heartbeat. And again, there is there's an ecosystem for it. It's just in limited states, or at least, again, the last time I checked, Jersey and Nevada and a number of others. But yeah, oh man, if we could ever get it back to the levels anywhere near that it used to be, even if it's U.S. market only, if it's the whole country, there's a decent enough market there. But the days when it was like back, globally, ridiculous. Playing against dudes in Sweden at 3 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, I think that'll wrap up our little conversation here, gang. Appreciate you guys. Check out rotoscouts.com. All the projections for all the sports. Every main slate for basketball. Every main slate for hockey. Every football showdown slate. Every main slate Sunday. Bunch of work goes into the football content as far as writing up a big article and putting features together. Ranking all the players. Daily projections for the other sports. Under $1 a day, weekly, monthly, and quarterly plans. Sliding scale downward from $1 a day. Or from under $1 a day. Check it out. So if you subscribe today, you subscribe right now for under $7. You'll have access to tonight's Showdown slate for football. Basketball, I think hockey tipped off or opened up a little bit a couple minutes ago, but you would have had it. Main slate football this weekend. Every basketball and hockey slate between now and next Thursday. And then next Thursday's football game plus the Monday night football game. All of that would have been in. For under $7 to like $6.30 something, I think. If you go to the monthly, it's a little bit, bigger initial, but on a per day basis, cuts your costs a little bit. We're trying to keep all the money in your bankrolls, build those bankrolls up, use your money the right way. No reason to be paying thousands of dollars for projections or hundreds of dollars for projections. So check it out. I also encourage you to check out the site that's up on the screen here with acemind.io. Those guys rocking. Their tools are awesome. So give them a peek. Which lineup should I pick for NFL, says Malcolm Revamp. We did good news. We did just do a whole, I'm going to say hour like 15. Probably just been bullshitting for about 15 minutes now. But there's a whole show that we just did about that, Malcolm. So slide it back and rewind there. But you're looking at FanDuel results. That question definitely depends on where you're playing. Those were FanDuel lineups. These are the DraftKings lineups. I did show these in greater detail before. These are sorted by lineup score, which is partly driven by ROI, and that's the biggest chunk of the lineup score. Then there's a little bit of win rate and top 1% rate. But any of these lineups are strong performers. Which one should you choose? That's why you got to build your lineup, buddy. But yeah, all of those are good performers. Feel free to take any of them. I don't legally encourage you to take any of them, and that's not why they're on the screen, but they are there. Mamba got somebody to bet $1 million on McCaffrey's line. We've got one whale in chat, and he just made Mamba's McCaffrey bet and crushed his line. Good shit. All right, guys. That's it for me. I'm going to punch out. This was a fun one. We will catch you tomorrow for NBA. Full slate of NBA tomorrow. Just one game today. Another stupid NBA Cup day tomorrow. So that'll be fun to talk through. So tune in for that. Good luck out there tonight. Somebody go win something. We'll see you.